I was driving through rural Kansas on one of those endless rural routes, with no towns, no gas stations, just corn on either side and a black sky that seemed to go on forever. It was around 2 in the morning, and the plan was to drive straight to Topeka. That's when I saw the traffic light. All alone, in the middle of nowhere. A green light hovering over the road as if someone had forgotten to turn it on. I thought it was odd. There was no intersection, no side road, just this tall, rusty traffic light, blinking a steady green, as if telling me to keep going. I passed it without thinking much, but I glanced in the rearview mirror just on impulse. It was still green. I kept going. But after about 15 minutes, another one appeared. Same model, same height, same light. And again, green. By this point I was getting restless. It didn't make sense. It wasn't an urban area. It was a straight, deserted road. But what made me most uncomfortable was the fact that I hadn't seen any other vehicles since I'd entered there. Not one. Just the road, the corn, and the green traffic lights, which were becoming more and more frequent. I started counting. I saw 4 of them in the space of half an hour. At some point, I started to slow down. I wanted to take a closer look, to understand what was happening. And that's when I realized something. The traffic light was only green while I was moving. The moment I took my foot off the accelerator and let the truck roll in neutral, the light flickered. I blinked, and it almost went out. And when I stopped completely, wanting to test it, what happened made me freeze. The green lights suddenly went out. And the road ahead started to move. Not the cars. Not the asphalt. The entire road, like an airport conveyor belt, moving on its own, going in the opposite direction of my truck. It felt like everything in front of me was being pulled away. Like the world beyond that traffic light was sliding backward. I looked at the corn on either side. It was still. But the horizon, the lanes, even the streetlights, they were all moving, as if time had become detached from space. I started the engine again, and the green light shone brightly again. The road stopped moving. But now I knew. That traffic light wasn't a traffic signal. It was a limit. And something wanted me to never stop again. I started driving again, but now with a heavy heartbeat. Green made me nauseous. That light seemed more alive than electric, as if it had a mind of its own. I tried to get off the road, take a side entrance, any detour. But there was none. Just a fence, a cornfield, and more straight road. I even tried to make a U-turn, but every time I started to maneuver, the engine would fail. As if the truck wouldn't accept changing direction. And then, when I tried for the 3rd time, the radio turned on by itself. Static, crackling, and a very low voice. Repeating a single phrase, keep going, keep going, keep going. I turned the radio off with a bang, but it would turn itself back on. Even with the button locked. And it was always the same voice, like a child mumbling too close to the microphone. I started to step on the gas. I wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. But no matter how much I accelerated, the mileage marker wouldn't move forward. It was like I was stuck in a loop. The traffic lights reappeared, but now lower, closer to the road. And every time I passed one, the green lights would blink for a second, as if hesitating. As if they were analyzing me. The road began to change. The asphalt was no longer as smooth. I saw cracks, stains that looked like splatters of rust or dried blood. The white lines became crooked, as if someone had painted them in a hurry. And suddenly, I felt the truck sink a little, as if the road had become heavier. I looked in the rearview mirror and almost lost control. The last traffic light, the one I had just passed, was red. But only behind me. The light didn't reflect on the road, or on the corn. It was as if it shone on a different plane. And that made me realize that maybe I wasn't driving on a road at all anymore. I stopped the truck on impulse, without thinking. I wanted to get out. Run. Do anything. But the ground seemed to be pulsing. The asphalt beneath the tires shook slightly, in a constant rhythm, like a heart beating. I took out my cell phone, tried to send my location, take a picture, anything. But there was no signal. Just a blue dot spinning on the map, as if not even the GPS knew where I was. And when I looked out the window, the nearest traffic light was right next to the truck. Almost touching it. Green. But without a pole. Without a cable. Just it, floating in the dark. Illuminating the glass with that light that didn't warm anything. I tried to start the engine again, but the entire dashboard was flashing, as if it were breaking down. The green light from the traffic light was now flooding the cabin, reflecting off the windshield, the steering wheel, and my skin. It was as if I was being scanned. The radio started to crackle again, and the same voice repeated louder, "Don't stop, keep going." I covered my ears, but the voice seemed to be coming from inside my head now. I turned on the engine hard, without waiting for it to stabilize, and put my foot down. The truck took off, and for a moment, everything was too bright, as if I were going through a tunnel of light. Out of nowhere, I was back on the regular road. Straight. Dark. No traffic lights. No radio on. GPS working. The dashboard was normal. It was as if nothing had happened. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, the horizon behind me still glowed with a greenish hue, far away, almost like a memory. I drove to the next gas station without saying anything. I didn't answer any calls, I didn't touch the radio. I just took deep breaths and thought about how that could have been real. Or if it still was. Because the feeling that remained was that, at any moment, I could cross back to that place. Without warning. The next morning, I checked the route in the GPS history. The section where the traffic lights appeared simply did not exist. No entrances, no secondary roads, nothing. Just a blank space. And even stranger, the truck's odometer showed 30 miles more than the GPS had recorded. As if I had gone somewhere, and come back. I took the truck in for a checkup, and the technician said there was no problem. But he asked me something that stopped me cold. Do you know why there is a faint smell of burning ozone in the wiring? I've never been able to explain it. All I know is that night, the green never changed. And the road ahead started moving on its own. And since then, whenever I see a traffic light in a place where it shouldn't be, even if it's just a reflection in the glass, I keep driving. Because now I know what happens when we stop. The first time it happened was on a freezing night, driving along Highway 104 from Amherst to Antigonish. The road there is lonely in a strange way, as if it had been forgotten by the rest of the country. It was late, it must have been almost 3 in the morning. There was no one on the road, just the darkness and my truck cutting through the silence. I had the radio off, as I always do when I want to pay attention to the engine noises. Everything was normal, until it turned on by itself. No music playing. Just a soft hiss. I thought I had touched the button by accident. But then came the detail that gave me goosebumps. The sound it was making was, the cabin. At first I thought it was an echo, a feedback. But then I noticed that the hissing sound was mixed with familiar sounds, the zipper on my jacket scraping as I moved, the creak of the seat, even the sound of the thermos cup touching the dashboard. But everything came with a slight delay. As if the radio was reproducing the sound of what I was doing, a second later. I tested it, I tapped my finger on the steering wheel. A second later, I heard the same sound on the radio. I moved the bottle, same thing. And then it happened. I coughed. And I heard another cough, before mine. As if someone inside already knew I was going to cough. And after that, there was laughter. It was soft. Low. But definitely human. A short, muffled laugh, as if someone were laughing at me inside the radio. I turned it off right away, but the radio stayed on. The light was dim, but the buttons still glowed. And even without sound, the air inside the cabin seemed to change. Denser. As if the truck was occupied by someone else. I looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing. But the mirror seemed darker than usual. I kept driving in silence, but the tension in my neck wouldn't let me. And then, without touching anything, the radio turned on again. And it reproduced my breathing. But at a rhythm that wasn't mine. I slowed down. I tried to figure out if it was an electrical fault, interference, something. I grabbed my cell phone and tried to record the sound. But every time I pointed the microphone, the radio went silent. As if it knew it was being watched. When I stopped recording, the sound came back. Hissing, breathing, small sounds from the cabin, and sometimes, short phrases. Single words that seemed to imitate what I was saying. Tired. Night. I'll keep going. But with the wrong intonation, dry, as if it were another voice trying to learn to speak like me. After a while, I decided to pull over at a turnoff in the road. I needed to breathe, to understand what was happening. I turned everything off, engine, radio, lights. I sat in the dark, in silence. But even with the truck turned off, the radio turned on again. No sound, just the light. And then, slowly, a recording started to come out. It wasn't music, or static. It was my voice. A conversation I remembered having hours before, talking to myself about the delivery, complaining about the cold. Only the tone was wrong. The voice was mine, but there was something distorted. As if a part of the intonation was missing. And then, in the middle of the recording, the other voice appeared. It was more serious. Masculine. As if someone was responding, using the same phrases I had said, but at different times. Like a poorly synchronized echo. But what gave me the most chills was that, at a certain point, the other voice said something I had never said, I am here with you. Direct, slow, cold. I turned the engine back on, put it in gear, and drove away. But no matter how much I accelerated, I felt like the radio was still listening to me. Sometimes it would turn on just to make a short sound. A creak. A sigh. A whisper that I couldn't understand, but that seemed to be waiting for a response. I arrived at a gas station at dawn, exhausted. I stopped, went straight to the bathroom, and washed my face. When I came back, the radio was off. Phew. But as soon as I turned the truck back on, it wouldn't start. The battery was good, the dashboard was lit, but the engine wouldn't respond. And the radio came back on. The screen showed a station name I'd never seen before, Cab 112. I'd never heard of that. And when I turned up the volume, just to test it out, I heard the coughing again. But this time it repeated over and over, like a stuck tape. Until it stopped. And someone said softly, next. Since then, that frequency has appeared from time to time. Even in other states, in other trucks. Sometimes when everything is turned off. Sometimes just in the background of static. And it always reproduces things I haven't done yet. As if it knew beforehand. As if it were recording the future in real time. Once, I heard my own voice saying, "Close the door." 15 seconds later, the trunk door opened by itself. And then I understood that it wasn't an echo. It was observation. As if someone was listening to everything, all the time, and trying to imitate me. Replace me. One night I tested it. I said nonsensical things out loud, like, "I'm going to turn it off now," or, "Is anyone there?" The radio responded with static and then repeated the phrase, but in a different voice. Mine, yes, but slower, more drawn out, almost tired. As if the recording was from a future where I was already exhausted from saying that. When I turned the radio off by force and removed the fuse, it stayed on for a few seconds before going out. And the cabin was left with a smell of dust and burnt iron that never completely went away. After that, I started to notice small delays in my actions. As if the world around me responded with milliseconds of delay. I open the window, and the sound of the wind comes later. I step on the brake, and the noise comes in faintly, like a poorly synchronized video. I wonder if it's just my impression, or if that thing on the radio messed with more than just the sound. Maybe with the timeline of things. Maybe with my perception. Because even the mirror started to show me things that didn't make sense. Reflections that didn't match the present. These days, I don't leave any radio on anymore. I don't even leave my cell phone on speakerphone, or anything that can pick up sound. I use earplugs when I need to rest in the cab. But sometimes I wake up to a phrase I've never heard before. You shouldn't be here, whispered very close by. When I look around, of course, there's no one there. But the radio, even when it's turned off, seems to be looking back at me. That blank, black screen, like a closed eye waiting for the right moment to open again. I think it was there, in Nova Scotia, that something got into the truck with me. It wasn't an interference. It was a presence. A listening. Something that doesn't speak, it just waits. It waits for me to speak, to repeat. It waits for me to react, to understand. And maybe, one day, to replace it. I heard someone cough, a second before I coughed. And then, someone laughed. It all started with a horn. A simple, everyday sound that every truck driver hears 1,000 times a week. But this one, it rang alone. And always at the same time. I was doing a night delivery between Truro and Penzance, and for a while I thought it was an electrical fault. It started at 2 a.m. sharp, lasted a few seconds, then went silent. The first few nights I thought it might be another truck nearby. But there was no one there. The road was deserted at that time. And the sound came clearly from my cab. I took it to the company mechanic. He tested everything, disassembled the dashboard, checked the wiring. He said there was something wrong with the horn relay, so he removed the component completely. Now it can't be honked, he said. I drove that night with relief. But at 2:03 in the morning, it honked. Louder than ever. Like it was inside my head. I braked immediately, looked around. Nothing on the road. Just the sound vibrating through the bodywork, echoing like a warning. I went back to the mechanic the next day. He swore that the horn was no longer installed. I started recording the trips. I placed my cell phone near the dashboard and left the microphone on. And then things got worse. The horn not only honked between 2 o'clock and 2:04, but sometimes it changed tone. It was no longer just a warning sound. It sounded like a sequence. Like a code. Like it was trying to communicate something. I took the audio to a friend who knows about these things. He said it didn't sound like a defect. And he suggested I record from outside the truck. I did. I parked in an open area and stood outside, recording the sound of the horn coming from inside the cabin. In the recording, you can hear the engine off, the total silence of the road, and then, promptly at 2:01, the sound. But what scared me was that, in the second audio, before the horn honked, you can hear breathing. Low. Long. As if someone was waiting for the right moment to press the horn. But I was alone. I locked the doors. I checked everything before going to sleep inside. And still, the sound continued. The horn honked as if it were being activated by a presence that knew exactly what it was doing. As if it wasn't a defect, but routine. There was a night when I decided to stay awake, staring straight at the dashboard, waiting for the time. I wanted to see if it would happen with the truck stopped. At 1:59, nothing. At 2 o'clock, silence. But at 2:02, without any movement from me, without any button pressed, the horn sounded. And the scariest thing, the horn button went down by itself. As if an invisible finger had pressed it. I jumped out of the cab, my heart racing. And again, the same sequence, 2 long beeps, 1 short pause, and 1 more. Always the same. I started to write down the patterns. It was as if it was calling me. Testing me. I went back to the mechanic and asked him to check if someone had installed something hidden. He dismantled the entire panel, checked every single harness. Nothing. No active connections. And he told me something that left me cold. Look, if this is ringing, it's not electricity. It's something else. After that, I stopped looking for a technical explanation. I started thinking about what I had done differently before the first time the sound appeared. That's when I remembered, a few weeks earlier, I had stopped in a village between Bodmin and Liskeard, taking an alternative route because the main one was blocked. I slept in the truck near an old abandoned mill. Since then, the time has never changed. Always between 2 o'clock and 2:04. And it doesn't matter where I am. Whether it's in London, in another truck, on a trip that doesn't even involve Cornwall. The horn sounds. Even if the truck doesn't have a horn installed. I once took a trip in a new truck, fresh out of the garage. No history. Nothing out of the ordinary. The first morning, at 2:01. The sound came. And now it seemed even closer. As if it wasn't coming from the cab anymore. But from inside my head. I woke up sweating, with the feeling that someone was in the back seat. But trucks don't have back seats. The other night, I dreamed about the horn before it honked. In the dream, I was driving down an endless road, and each time it honked, the world around me grew a little darker. As if the sound was slowly erasing reality. When I woke up, I was shaking, and the horn honked faintly but continuously. It never stopped. It only disappeared when I turned on the engine and started driving. And now I wonder if that sound haunts me. Or guides me. Because every time I ignore it, something breaks. Something fails. One time, I didn't pay attention, and the brakes locked on the downhill slope. I almost didn't turn back. I thought about quitting the road. Selling the truck, changing my life. But the truth is that I feel like I've already gone past that point. What started with a horn has become a ritual, a presence that manifests itself every morning as if it had something to say. And the worst part is that, over time, I began to understand the tones. I can't explain how, but it sounds like language. Sometimes it's as if it were saying, yes. Other times, wait. And there was one time, just one time, when the pattern changed completely. It sounded as if it were saying, the time has come. And that same night, the truck's radio tuned into a dead station by itself. Just static. And in the background, a voice said my name. I don't know if I'm going crazy. I've been to mediums, priests, and even a paranormal sound technician I found on an online forum. No one could explain it to me. They just told me not to respond. Never to respond. Because if that's what they think, a consciousness trying to tune into mine, any reaction could be an invitation. Since then, I just let the sound happen. I wait for the 4 minutes to pass. And I continue on my way. As if nothing had happened. But there are days when, after the horn sounds, I smell something burning. And the air inside the cabin gets denser. As if someone had just left. One night I parked near the sea, just to get away from the usual routes. I thought that maybe the wind would make the sound of the horn disappear. But it rang out anyway. At 2:03, the sound echoed, and the seagulls took off. As if something had really happened there. When I went to check the horn button, it was cold. But there was a fingerprint on the dust on the dashboard. A fingerprint that wasn't mine. Small, thin. Impossible. I stared at it for minutes, until the fingerprint disappeared on its own, as if it had been erased from within. The mechanic assured me, it was removed. But this morning, it rang again. It was a night with no traffic, deep in the Ohio countryside. I was on I-71, heading towards Cincinnati, just wanting to drop off the cargo and get some sleep. It was around 2 in the morning when I saw the first sign. Exit 9, home. That was it. White, old, with faded letters, hanging crookedly from an iron hook. I had never seen that exit before. I thought it was strange, because I know that stretch well. I've driven by it dozens of times. And that, home, it bothered me. It wasn't the name of a city. Just, home. It seemed like a personal warning. Or a trap. The GPS didn't show any exit there. But then, the GPS voice, which had been muted, spoke to itself, "This is your only chance." I almost let go of the steering wheel. The voice was cold, automatic, but with a slight echo. As if it had come from inside the cabin. The screen still didn't update anything, it only showed the straight road, with no intersections. When I looked ahead again, the sign had disappeared. But 200 meters later, another one appeared. Same text. Exit 9, home. And an arrow to the right. Without thinking much, I turned. Exhaustion and curiosity pushed me. And that's when it started. I pulled into a narrow, dimly lit exit. The asphalt looked darker, as if it had been freshly painted but was already worn. No other cars. No lights other than the headlights of my truck. I drove on for a few minutes, hoping to find an intersection, a small town, anything. But all I saw was more road. More brush. More streetlights without bulbs. And then I realized the GPS signal had dropped. The screen froze. And the time stuck at 2:09. The radio crackled, even though it was turned off. And I began to wonder if you were still in the state of Ohio. What really got me was when I tried to turn back. I turned around, thinking I was going back to the main highway. But the road behind me wasn't the same anymore. The entrance sign was gone. The trees seemed closer to the road. And a thin mist began to cover everything. As if I were entering another place. Another time. And the radio suddenly whispered, "Don't leave now." It was my voice. But I didn't say anything. I tried to stay calm, to drive slowly. But no matter how hard I drove, the scenery didn't change. It was like I was stuck in a loop of roads, the same bushes, the same bent branch lying on the shoulder, the same rusty sign that had fallen over that said, Exit 9. I even stopped to see if I was hallucinating. I got out, walked a few steps, and touched the sign. It was cold, real. The ground there felt drier than the rest, as if no one had been there in a long time. When I got back to the truck, the passenger door was ajar. I was sure I had locked it. I slammed the door shut, started the engine again, and drove off. That's when I realized that the digital clock on the dashboard still showed 2:09. I looked at my cell phone, 2:09. And it stayed like that for hours. There was no sunrise. No sign of time passing. No sign of life. The radio started playing a children's song, very low and distorted, as if it had been recorded on an old tape recorder. But the lyrics talked about going home and never leaving again. I started to sweat, even with the cold air. Every curve I made seemed to take me to the same place, as if the road was doubling back on itself. At one point, I saw an abandoned gas station. I stopped on impulse. The structure was half destroyed, full of weeds growing around it. But the sign still flashed open, only it went out and back on in a strange rhythm. I went into the little store, calling for someone, but there was no one there. Everything was dusty, frozen in time. An open bag of potatoes on the counter, but there was no smell. It looked like a fake storefront. And on the back wall, tacked with thumbtacks, was a map of the region. Except where exit 9 should have been, there was a black stain. As if someone had burned that spot on the paper. I stumbled back to the truck. I started the engine and just wanted to get out of there. But I didn't know where out meant. I kept driving until I was almost out of gas. And when I finally stopped, the GPS turned back on. The screen lit up with a simple message, "You are home now." But I didn't recognize anything. No roads, no coordinates, no familiar landscape. It was as if I had been transported to an alternate version of the route. An imperfect replica. Everything was similar, but wrong. And the worst part, I couldn't remember how many days I had been driving. When I finally managed to get off that stretch and find a gas station with people, the sun was already high in the sky. I felt exhausted, as if I had been driving for days, but the odometer showed only 29 miles more. I asked the attendant where I was. He answered as if it were obvious, "You're near Columbus, sir." But Columbus was more than 4 hours away from where I had taken that exit. I showed him my GPS, but the history showed a straight route, with no detours. No record of exit 9. No indication that I had left the highway. As if that had been erased from the system's memory. I tried to retrace the route weeks later, with another truck. I paid attention to all the signs. Nothing. No exit 9 sign. I asked other truck drivers about it, and some of them looked at me strangely. One of them, an older one, said he had heard of it. There are some things on the road that you only see when you're weak, tired, or too close to the end. He didn't explain anything else, he just told me to never follow signs that say, "Home again." If it's a real home, you don't need a sign. You'll recognize it. That has stuck with me to this day. Even today, the GPS sometimes crashes around 2 in the morning. I've received that message again, "This is your only chance." I ignore it. Always. But I confess that there are nights when the road is so long, so empty, that I think about trying again. See if the exit appears. But then I remember the feeling of not knowing where I was, of time standing still, of the sunlight that never rose. Of the radio playing my own voice whispering, "Stay." It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. It was all too real. And if it weren't for some force that pushed me back, maybe I would still be there now. The sign said, "Exit 9, home." And the GPS voice insisted, "This is your only chance." But that exit doesn't exist. At least not for those who want to go back. If you've ever driven Route 8 between Kalgoorlie and Norseman, you know how it feels like another planet. A long, dry stretch of road with open skies and no sign of civilization for miles. But it was on a Friday the 13th 2 years ago that I saw something that has made me avoid that route ever since. It started with a reddish glow in the sky, as if the sun had stopped setting halfway through. But it wasn't a sunset. It was like an aurora, only red, thick, spiraling down from the sky, covering everything. The clock read 11:47 p.m. when everything turned red. And for 10 minutes, it was like the world had changed dimensions. At first, I thought it was some natural phenomenon. But then I saw the shadows. Floating in the sky, like human silhouettes hovering, shapeless, slowly rotating over the road. They didn't look solid. They were like dark smoke against the crimson background. I looked around in disbelief. But the worst thing was what I saw on the horizon. A truck just like mine, the same model, the same cargo. And it was moving, about 200 meters ahead. Only I was the only one on that road. Me. My radio was muted, the GPS was frozen, and no other presence had passed by me in the last few hours. I accelerated to catch up. I wanted to understand, to confirm. But no matter how hard I stepped on it, the other truck kept the exact distance. And that's when I noticed the details. It had the same license plate. The same cracked bumper sticker. And, even worse, the cab window was open, just like mine. It was like seeing a reflection that moves before you. At one point, the other truck signaled to the left, but there was no way out. Just dry grass and sand. Even so, it turned. It disappeared as if it had crossed a crevice. And right after that, the red sky began to fade. As if someone had turned off a spotlight. I pulled over to the side of the road, sweating. I got out and looked up at the sky. There was still a residual glow, like dying embers. There were no tire tracks from the other truck on the ground. Only mine. I took out my phone to record the traffic, but it was completely frozen, still showing 11:47 p.m. It wouldn't update. None of the apps worked. When the sky cleared up, the GPS reconnected and showed that I was exactly where the red line had started. As if I hadn't moved. But the mileage had increased. And so had the fuel. As if I had driven for hours. I continued on my journey, feeling a bit dazed, not really understanding what had happened. I arrived at Norseman with a strange sensation in my body, as if I had been sleeping standing up for hours. At the gas station, I mentioned it to one of the guys who works there, an old man who seemed to have seen it all. When I mentioned the red sky, he froze. He was quiet for a few seconds and then asked, "Friday the 13th?" I nodded. He just shook his head and said, "There are drivers who disappear on this road on those nights. Then they show up, days later, saying they followed a truck just like theirs." And then he added, "But they don't always come back the same way." That sentence chilled me. Since then, I've avoided driving on dates that overlapped with Friday the 13th. But in March of last year, there was no way around it. I took Route 8 again, the same stretch, and the night was clear. For a moment, I thought it was just going to be another trip. But at 11:47 p.m., there it was again. The sky, out of nowhere, began to change color. As if it were bleeding. And as soon as the light took over the road, I saw the shadows again. Only this time, they were lower. Closer to the cabin. Floating slowly, as if they were looking for something. Or someone. This time, I didn't see another truck. But I did see lights, headlights, in the opposite direction. As if someone was coming toward me. I flashed my headlights, but nothing. The red light swallowed everything, and the headlights disappeared. When they passed me, I saw no vehicle. Only the sound of the wind changing, as if something immaterial had crossed my path. I looked in the rearview mirror, and for an instant, I saw my own truck driving in the opposite direction. No driver. No reflection. Just the silhouette, dragging the sound of the tires as if floating over the asphalt. I blinked and it was no longer there. The sky didn't return to normal until 11:57 p.m. exactly 10 minutes. And the clock on the dashboard, which had frozen, went straight to midnight. As if that time didn't exist. Ever since then, this part of the road feels different. The air is thicker, the sky is darker, even on clear nights. And every time I pass by there, the radio crackles, the GPS falters, and I feel like I'm being watched. As if every Friday the 13th, this place opens up for a few minutes, and shows a piece of another world. Some colleagues say it's all in my head. That it was fatigue, dehydration, whatever. But what no one can explain is why every device in that region crashes at exactly 11:47 p.m. on every Friday the 13th. I've compared data, recorded videos, taken a radiation meter, even a compass. Everything fails in those 10 minutes. And the weirdest thing, I've heard reports of drivers who, after that time, appeared on the other side of the state, without remembering how. One guy swore he saw himself inside the truck's cab. He tried to honk, but the image disappeared like vapor. For me, what happened there was not a vision. It was an encounter. With another version of myself. With another reality. With a road that overlaps ours for only 10 minutes, as if a crack opened in the sky and let fragments of something that shouldn't be here fall. The so-called red sky seems to follow rules. Always at the same time. Always on that route. Always with the same strange silence, where even the wind stops blowing. And most importantly, I never tried to follow anything that seemed too familiar. Nowadays, whenever I see the calendar showing a Friday the 13th, I organize my deliveries to stay away from it. But every time, without fail, I receive a notification on my phone around 11:30 p.m., with no sender, no history, just the message, the sky will open again. I deleted them all. But it's no use. They come back. And always in the same tone, as if they were invitations. As if someone, or something, was still waiting for me to cross over once more. That first night, I saw my own truck, up ahead, driving itself. And ever since then, I'm not sure I ever came back with the same version of myself.